terror attack. Catholics react after 20 people are killed during a Sunday Mass in the Philippines. Clergy sex abuse scandal. Pope Francis weighs in on next month's Vatican summit to address the crisis. 2020 vision. A senator from California accused of anti-Catholic bias kicks off her presidential campaign. And Catholics in Cuba. We'll tell you about a parish 60 years in the making. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, January 28, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Catholic leaders in the Philippines are condemning a deadly terrorist attack on a prominent cathedral. The bishops are offering their prayers after more than a dozen people were killed by explosives during Sunday's Mass. It's the only Christian majority nation in Southeast Asia. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee joins us with response from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. U.S. officials are joining the bishops in condemning the bombings in the southern part of the country. It appears to be a deliberate terror attack against the Catholic community. The State Department says the U.S. is committed to helping the Philippines fight terrorism.
The Cathedral of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, devastated by a pair of bombings during Sunday Mass. The president of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, surveying the broken pews and shattered stained glass today. A group with allegiance to ISIS claims to have set off the explosives, which killed at least 20 and wounded more than 100. Edward Nahn lost his mother, who was attending Mass.
My 81-year-old mother doesn't deserve this kind of violent death.
The attack occurred in Jolo, a town in the southern part of the country where Islamic militants have carried out bombings, kidnappings, and beheadings, often against Catholics. Authorities say the first blast on Sunday sent people running out of the cathedral. Soon after, a second bomb exploded at the main entrance. Duterte has ordered the army to crush the terrorists who carried out the attack. Government officials say this is not a religious war, but an act of terrorism.
Reitero mi más firme reprobación por este episodio de violencia.
The Holy Father is joining with the country's bishops in condemning the violence, saying he joins with the Philippines in mourning, adding the Church entrusts the victims to Christ and the Virgin Mary.
About 81% of the population in the Philippines is Catholic, but there is a large population of Muslims in the south. For decades, the government has fought militant groups, many of whom still want to separate from the country. Lauren?
Wyatt, I understand that the Red Cross is helping out victims and their families. What's being done to make sure that this just does not happen again?
Well, the government has put police forces around the country on heightened alert to prevent similar attacks. Despite criticism, the President, Rodrigo Duterte, is still defending his decision to keep the area under martial law, which has already been in place. He says without military rule, the cathedral attack could have led to more chaos and anarchy. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. Joining me now is Gayle Manchin, Vice Chair with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, also called USCIRF. Gayle, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
President Duterte has long gone after Catholics in this country. He has said that he wants to beat up priests and bishops. He's threatened one bishop who criticized him with beheading, and the people who criticize his war on drug dealers. He's now there, but what percent of blame goes toward the president for this?
Well, I think anyone that uses angry, violent language in commenting certainly incites violence, and that's why, as a commissioner for USCIRF, we certainly don't advocate for that type of behavior. You want to build bridges with people, but what more than anything is you want to stress the importance of respectful behavior for all religious groups.
Well, let's talk about the Muslim insurgency and the Muslim separatists who operate in this part of the Philippines. What can you tell us about that and the history? These bombings come nearly a week after they voted for greater autonomy in a referendum.
Well, again, I think Muslims want to be respected for their religion the same way Catholics want to be respected, or any religion. And I just would like to insert that as Catholics, Joe and I certainly offer our condolences.
Your husband, Joe Manchin, the senator from West Virginia.
Yes. Yes. To offer our condolences to the families of the victims, to the first responders, to the patrolmen, to the bystander, people that were just, hurt in this. And it just, again, goes back to a church should be a safe place to be. Your home should be a safe place for Muslims, for Catholics. And you wonder sometimes if these radical people don't use perhaps that some Muslims want something different, that they don't use that as an excuse then to attack, that just creates this atmosphere when we should be trying to
establish peace efforts. Let's talk about
peace.
Yeah, Saint Pope Paul VI, and I read about this in this wonderful book by Matthew Bunson, who happens to work for EWTN. He was the first pope to come to the Philippines in 1970. In his address to the bishops at that point, he talked about its geographical vastness, the enormous multitudes who inhabit the Philippines, and 50 years later, we're seeing this kind of bombing. What needs to happen to bring religious harmony to the Philippines, in your opinion?
Well, the same thing for the Philippines as I would say for the rest of the world. We need to quit speaking in violent, ugly rhetoric to one another and start talking about respecting one another's values and religious beliefs, whatever they are, or non-beliefs. But whatever they were, that is a basic human right. And USCIRF, certainly, that is the reason it was formed. That's the reason we have 9 commissioners, that we travel, we advocate, we adopt prisoners of conscience to try to make people aware of what's going on. I think, unfortunately, until there's a bombing like this and people are killed, people don't realize maybe what's happening as an undercurrent.
It's unfortunate that it takes such a tragedy to bring people together and to bring the world attention. Gayle Manchin, Vice Chair with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Thank you, Gayle, for joining us.
No, Lauren, thank you for having us. Thank you.
The stock market dropped more than 200 points today amid continuing fears of another government shutdown. The Congressional Budget Office says the shutdown that ended Friday cost the U.S. at least $3 billion. And the White House hopes Democrats are ready to negotiate a new deal.
It's up to Congress. This is whether the Democrats are now willing to negotiate in good effort. We've seen in the past several weeks that they have been unwilling to do so. I do think that the president has perfectly set the table for these negotiations to happen, or he will find other ways to fund the border.
Mercedes Schlapp is a Catholic and is President Trump's Director of Strategic Communications. The president's standoff with Democrats on Capitol Hill is far from over. The clock is ticking. Senator Kamala Harris has set her sights on the White House in 2020, but her latest statements have some groups warning the California Democrat is anti-Catholic. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reports.
Senator Kamala Harris on Sunday formally kicked off her campaign for the White House.
With faith in God, with fidelity to country, and with the fighting spirit I got from my mother.
The Baptist and first-term U.S. Senator says she'll unite America.
I'm running to be president of the people, by the people, and for all people.
Harris supports unrestricted access to abortion. Planned Parenthood gives her a 100% voting record. She focused in on that issue during Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing in the fall.
Do you believe the right to privacy protects a woman's choice to terminate a pregnancy?
That is a question that, of course, implicates Roe v. Wade.
In written questions to another Catholic judicial nominee, Harris pressed him about his membership in a Catholic organization. Were you aware that the Knights of Columbus opposed a woman's right to choose when you joined the organization? From 2011 to 2017, Harris served as California's Attorney General. During her tenure, she investigated pro-life activist and Catholic David Daleiden. He recently spoke with EWTN Pro-Life Weekly's Catherine Hadro about the probe.
They recorded in their case notes, Planned Parenthood specifically requesting of Kamala Harris's office that they would specifically go in and seize the videos from me. So they were trying to take all the raw footage away.
The Catholic League, a group that advocates for Catholics in the public square, says Kamala Harris must renounce what they call her anti-Catholicism before anyone takes her seriously as a presidential candidate. Harris is jumping into what is expected to be a crowded 2020 Democratic primary. If elected, she'd be the first African-American woman and first person of Asian heritage to be president. Lauren?
Jason Calvi reporting. Thank you, Jason. Coming up later in the broadcast, analysis on whether the president is any closer to his border wall after temporarily ending the government shutdown. A bill in Utah would ban people from changing the gender listed on their birth certificate. The proposal would define male and female as, quote, innate and immutable characteristics established at conception. The lawmaker introducing the bill says it's based on science and not on any form of phobia or hate. Vermont is considering a bill that would ban any government restrictions on abortion. Left-leaning states are moving to strengthen abortion rights since Brett Kavanaugh, a practicing Catholic, was appointed to the Supreme Court last year. And the Bishop of Covington, Kentucky, apologizes to students at a Catholic high school involved in a controversial video. In a letter to the boys' parents, Roger Foy says, quote, "We should not have allowed ourselves to be bullied and pressured into making a statement prematurely." The bishop in Kentucky initially condemned the actions of the Covington Catholic students who are seen with a Native American activist after the March for Life. Officials say the death toll from a dam collapse in Brazil has risen to 60. Firefighters are still searching for survivors from Friday's disaster near a mine. Nearly 300 people remain missing. Rescue efforts are being hampered by a sea of mud surging in the area. And a tornado pounds Cuba overnight, killing 3 and injuring more than 170. Power is cut to many areas in Havana, the country's capital. State media says the storm brought winds of more than 60 miles per hour. The United States announces new sanctions against Venezuela, saying it will block $7 billion in assets of the country's state-run oil company. Yesterday, the opposition leader attended a mass for people killed in protests. After Mass, Juan Guaido asked the military to stop supporting President Nicolas Maduro, saying the soldiers would be eligible for amnesty if they return the country to democracy. Guaido also calls on protesters to take to the streets again this week to protest Maduro's socialist government. Pope Francis knocks down expectations for next month's Vatican Summit on Clergy Sex Abuse.
Un'aspettativa gonfiata.
Aboard the papal plane returning from World Youth Day in Panama, the Holy Father said expectations are inflated. Last year, Pope Francis summoned all presidents of bishops' conferences from around the world to address the abuse crisis. Alan Holdren is the EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Alan, in the U.S., all eyes are on this abuse summit. Why is the Pope trying to dampen expectations?
Well, I think he's seen, Lauren, that the expectations that have been built up are way too big for these 3 days, basically, of meetings that they have, followed by a 4th day with a Mass. He said today that he wants to deflate those expectations to something concrete, that the bishops take care of victims, that they know the procedures, and that they take them home and they know how to investigate cases or potential cases. I think that's realistic, Lauren.
Pope Francis also spoke about another hot-button issue, priestly celibacy.
Yeah, he said he's not going to give any sort of a go-ahead to lift the requirement for celibacy in the Catholic Church, in the Roman Catholic Church. He said that in other rites there are married clergy. He said that in the Roman Catholic Church he would be willing to evaluate, consider the possibility of ordaining older married men that live in remote, far-flung parts of the world so that they would be able to give the sacraments to the Catholics in their areas. He said that for him, the gift, well, the celibacy in the Catholic Church is a gift, and that he would not put himself between God and that gift.
You know, one of the things that really interested me about his trip is when he was in Panama, this crisis in nearby Venezuela was just exploding, and the bishops in that country have expressed support for a very peaceful resolution. But the Pope's position, I'm sure, is peaceful. What else did he say?
Yeah, he said after Mass on Sunday, yesterday, with more than 600,000 people there present, he said that he supports a just and peaceful solution. There in Venezuela, he's very well informed on what's going on, and he knows that anything he says could be taken by one or the other side and used against the other side. He mentioned that in the press conference today. He said he supports a common agreement, and he said, I know that that can get me in trouble as well. I'm not supposed to say anything that could be construed as one side or the other. He said that he supports the people of Venezuela, and he's absolutely terrified that it could come to a bloodbath. He said that violence is not the solution.
I have thought about that every time I see all of that footage. What would happen if one side just got really hot? Alan, Pope Francis celebrated the closing Mass, and as you said, it was about 600,000 people. I was talking to my daughter about that today, and I was like, that's almost the size of the city of Washington, D.C. Yet the Holy Father was asked why young people are turning away from the church. What did he say?
He said that some of it is due to personal reasons. Most of it, he said, is general reasons. He spoke specifically about the Christian witness of church leaders. He said priests, bishops, even the Pope himself have to show their witness. They can't be businessmen. They can't just have an organization and a pastoral plan and just rely on that. They have to be in amongst the people. And he said that applies to all of them, down to the last one.
Alan Holdren, EWTN Rome Bureau Chief. Thank you, Alan, for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Coming up, the shutdown's over. What needs to happen to meet the next deadline? Now that the federal government workers are back on the job, the clock is ticking for lawmakers to put together a long-term spending package that satisfies both the White House and Capitol Hill. Who better to talk about this? Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief for The Hill. Bob, welcome back to our broadcast.
Hey, Lauren.
Here we are back at the beginning again. Congress debating how much money to give President Trump. President Trump saying he wants $5.7 billion. What are the chances of this deal ever happening?
I don't think there's going to be a deal between Democrats and Republicans over the next 3 weeks. So either A, we're going to face another shutdown, which I don't think is going to happen. I think Republicans really don't want another shutdown because it didn't accomplish anything, and they were battered by the polls. So I think that he is going to move towards a declaration. I just don't think
what would
there's
that
an
mean?
appetite.
A national
emergency
declaration
yes.
that that there's a problem at the border.
And the problem, of course, is he's been talking about this emergency for weeks, so that could hurt him in court. It would go to the courts. I think that's the only way they can resolve this and move on to other pieces of the agenda.
Let's look backwards a little bit. You just mentioned the poll. I want to put up a poll here that this Washington Post ABC News poll that was completed before last Friday's announcement that the president that the government would reopen. It shows his approval ratings, President Trump's, 58% disapprove to 37% of those who polled approve. How much of a factor do you think those numbers had in Friday's announcement?
A big factor. The party that's more united usually wins these type of showdowns. Democrats won this one. Now, the prior shutdown, about a year prior, Democrats lost that one. So I think the polls affected. Also, remember, President Trump is going to run for re-election. He needs the economy to be strong. And if the shutdown had continued, there was some speculation that it'd be 0% growth in the first quarter. I think that affected. I also think the airlines and the delays also had an impact on the president.
Yeah, LaGuardia shuts down, and that night
the
president says, "Okay, we're reopening it."
Yep.
I think you're onto something there. But you know, the other piece of this are these paychecks for the government workers. They've been promised they'll get it by the end of the week, but it's possible that they could go through this week again without getting anything. And the president told the Wall Street Journal yesterday another government shutdown is, quote, certainly an option. So what's happening to those caught in the middle here?
Well, I mean, they're getting hurt by this, and this could have ripple effects on the economy, not just short term, but long term. And I do think the president needs to keep some leverage here. He can't say, well, I'm going to cave and I'm going to give the Democrats what they want. He can't do that. At the same time, usually, as you know, Lauren, when there's a showdown of a deficit, crisis or something, it goes to the last second. I don't think this is going to go to the last second. I think they're going to resolve this one way or the other, days in advance, not minutes.
Yep, and we've also got to see the stock market hasn't been doing so well,
Right.
and we've also got to take a look at how much money the shutdown cost in billions, and we'll see those numbers, and that should probably provide quite a wake-up call for politicians.
Absolutely.
Bob Cusack, Editor-in-Chief for The Hill. Always great to have you.
Thanks,
you.
Lauren.
Up next, an invitation to the poor from Pope Francis, and a bright spot for the Catholic Church in Cuba. The Chinese researcher who claims to have edited genes of 2 baby girls told a U.S. Nobel laureate about the experiment months before the news became public. Professor Craig Mello at the University of Massachusetts at the time expressed his disapproval of the study, but did not report it. Scientists are debating whether to implement guidelines exposing troubling research. The former head of the Diocese of Hong Kong is set to receive a high honor. Cardinal Joseph Zen will be given the Truman Reagan Medal of Freedom in Washington, D.C. It honors his work against China's communist government. Zen, shown on our broadcast in 2017, has been a vocal critic of the Vatican's provisional deal with Beijing over the appointment of bishops. And it's lights, camera, action for 1,300 poor, homeless, and needy people. The Pope invited them to see Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, a permanent performance on display steps from St. Peter's Basilica. The music and the actors, the lights and the dance all depict how Michelangelo painted his masterpiece. I'd love to see that. Finally, tonight, a ray of hope for Cuba's Catholics as a new church opens its doors over the weekend. Religious Cubans for decades have suffered discrimination at the hands of the officially atheist government, until now. The parish of the Sacred Heart of Jesus in the western town of Sandino is one of 3 Catholic churches authorized by the government. It is the first Catholic church to be built on the island since the Communist Revolution. Maria, a Catholic, says Cubans have been waiting and asking for a church for a long time. Despite the rain, people from the town and surrounding villages filled Sacred Heart. It was built with nearly $100,000 in donations from St. Lawrence Catholic Church in Tampa, Florida.
It's us living out our baptismal call to go out into the whole world, to make disciples and to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's what this project's for, following what Christ has told us to do.
The Cuban state and Catholic Church clashed in the first decades of the revolution when many priests worked against the new communist state and were expelled by the government. President Fidel Castro began easing restrictions on religion in the 1990s. And now a Cuban church charging into the 21st century. Popes John Paul II, Benedict, and Pope Francis have all visited the island. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and Lauren Ashburn, EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.